Alright, hi, this is another lesson on the topic economic growth and economic development. So, we are looking at two concepts here in terms of how they're different, and it pretty much follows up from our last lesson on national income. So, please ensure that you look at that video lesson first before looking at this lesson. Is economic growth and development. So, the difference between the two. As you've seen, factors differ, but they are two key components that every country focuses on with their different policies and so that will help to build an economy. So when you hear talk about building and stimulating an economy, we're talking about stimulating economic growth and economic development, which looks at all these factors. All right. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask when we meet at our next session, or you can send it in through our classroom, online classroom, or for those who are in the WhatsApp chat, you can send your questions there. All right, all the best. So, Grenada's economy, going back to economic growth now, Grenada's economy have experienced some growth over the years. So, in 2018, we've seen a 4.83%, which was a 0.23% decline from 2017. Other years we've seen some increase, decline, so it fluctuated. So throughout a given year, right, which is the period that is measured, GDP is compared to the period before, and that is how they determine what percent of growth or increase would have been realized. So as we said, economic growth look at the expansion of GDP or the increase. So expansion here means increase when you measure one year to the next. Alright, so it's a quantitative increase in production or output of a given country. Economic growth increases in terms of capacity. Alright, so if an economy, experiences increase in productivity, which means there will be increase in goods and services produced, which means there will be increase in consumption, which means there will be increase in the size of the market because now demand will increase, which means there will be more inducement and incentive now for firms and businesses to start producing more, enlarging the capital base, the factories, and that helps economic growth. Alright, so these look at more quantitative factors which shows how the capacity of an economy would improve. So here we have again Grenada's GDP, right? And this should be more familiar with to you now, GDP per capita. And we see here from 2010 to 2018 how it has steadily increased from 2012 onwards. We see a steady increase in the GDP per capita. Now, GDP growth or economic growth can be affected by different things. So, how can countries help to improve, or how can they monitor and ensure that there's an increase in GDP? So, we're looking here at one investment in capital. Capital here, remember, looks at money, financial capital, and investment in fixed capital, the machinery, right? The equipment. So if countries can get more businesses to manufacture and improve their production of goods and services by investing in more capital, therefore we'll see more growth in the production of goods and services, and therefore we'll see economic growth. Right? If that does not happen, then economic growth will decline. Right? Which says that businesses are not producing as they ought to. Right, another factor is the discovery of new resources. Right, so we've mentioned that in Grenada, for instance, there are many natural resources that can be discovered or is already discovered but are not fully utilized to make goods and services. So we can discover, you see, like how Grenada has discovered oil, well, that can create a good industry which will enhance the production of goods within the country and of services and therefore lead to economic growth. So let's hope that that industry develops by the discovery of that new resource. Then we have efficient use of existing resources. Right? We need to ensure that resources are not wasted. So we have an abundance at a particular time of the year. We have an abundance of fruits, let's say like mangoes and those things that are, you know, produced by farmers, naturally produced. And what happens to them? So how can we make more efficient use of these resources? These are resources because we see many products being made from these natural resources. So in a country, if you can use your resources more efficiently, that will help to enhance your GDP, hence your economic growth. Then we have improvements in technology. So in the last lesson, we've looked at technology, ICT in the business sense, in terms of how they use it, and we've seen that there are a lot of benefits in terms of ICT in business. Now, if the private sector can invest in ICT, and we also see the public sector investing in ICT or technology, there will be improvement in production and productivity, and therefore more economic growth. Labor is also going to be more efficient. As I mentioned a while ago, productivity is enhanced due to improved technology, improved machinery, more investment. All right, that will lead to improved labor efficiency. And also, if they can have better training being done, education, that will also enhance the labor level of efficiency and therefore lead to economic growth. Government expenditure, which looks at government spending, this can also enhance economic growth, or it can have a negative impact. So, based on how government spends, can also have an impact or affect the growth of an economy. Right? So, in other words, government spending needs to be investment type that will bring back or bring inflows from the production that takes place. Right? So, this will lead to economic growth. And lastly, we have balance of payment. Now we're going to look at this when we look at international trade. The balance of payment basically looks at the records of a country in terms of the inflows from exports, selling of goods to other countries, versus the outflows, that is, buying goods from other countries to importing. So when the records balance off the two, it leaves a balance, and that balance will tell you whether that country has been trading positively or negatively, meaning are we exporting more than importing or importing more than exporting, which could have negative impacts. So based on the balance of payment figure, we will know whether or not the country experiences economic growth. Right, so I hope you understand those figures. So rolling back a bit, we say if the GDP increases, then there is economic growth. What if the GDP falls or declines, as we see in some cases for Grenada? This is called negative economic growth. And this basically exists when there is a decline or a fall in productive capacity from one period to another. So between 2017 and 2018, there was a decline in the GDP for Grenada. So that means there was negative economic growth. Alright? So basically, it means that the economy failed to expand in terms of its production. And the factors that we've just outlined could, one or two or more, could have been, the reason, right? So, for instance, maybe there was too much importing, so that caused a negative balance of payments and hence negative economic growth. And that has been one of the main issues in Grenada, where we importing more than we exporting. So more of our resources, income-wise, is leaving the country and not helping to contribute to our national income. Right? So countries do experience negative economic growth between one period to another. Right, so Grenada has experienced some economic growth negative wise throughout the years. We've seen just after Ivan 2004, 90% of the country's buildings and so were destroyed. So obviously, with this kind of um, capital loss, right, many businesses would have been affected. Tourism, our main sector, was affected. And after that, um, you know, dreadful economic, um, not economic, but after the dreadful hurricane, sorry, we see that there was a negative growth of 3%, right, for that period. So we do have natural disasters and sort that can cause the economy to be under strain because we lose assets that we will be depended on to create and produce our goods and services. All right. All right. Now we go to economic development. Now remember, we're looking at qualitative factors here that causes improvement in the economy. All right. So we're looking for a pattern of economic change. Now, yes, it is important to have economic growth if you want to see economic development because you depend on the production process to generate your income so that you can invest in your development. So that is necessary. But having economic growth does not mean you will have economic development. So, what is economic development? It refers to improvements in the standard of living, human capital development, and the enjoyment of freedoms. Right? So quality of life, standard of living, welfare of persons, these are things that we see improving and that um, indicates that the country is developing economically. Right? So here is an analogy that I often use. As an individual, you develop, well, you grow physically as you age, but growing physically as you age does not mean you're developing. Of course, we've seen from the health aspect of it that as a child grows, there's a certain development stage that's supposed to happen, right, until you get to adulthood. But it does not always follow that pattern for everyone. So we're saying therefore that sometimes you see growth in the economy, like you see individuals growing, they had changes, the body structure changes, but you're not seeing development because there are other factors, qualitative factors that must be um, improved for that to happen. So, in a similar fashion, right, the economy must experience, as I say, certain changes, right, technically and institutional changes that will cause the country to develop. Right? So it is shaped not just by the economic factors. Yes, we need GDP to increase to help development, but there are non-economic factors like environmental, social, cultural conditions of the economy that will help it develop. So yes, you can get economic growth when you see GDP changes and increases, but it does not mean that economic development has made the same change. Alright, so you're looking at certain qualitative factors that will help to determine if there was improvement. So these are some features of economic development. We have literacy rate, infrastructure improvement, internet access improvement, academic level, access to good quality housing, access to good quality healthcare, standard of living, um, changes within industry sectors, improvement there. We talked about labor intensive versus capital intensive, right? And then later on in a later chapter, we'll talk about economic dualism, where we see certain industries in various countries are not at the same level, right? So when we see these kind of improvements, it tells us that the country is developing. Now we have already looked at these indicators of quality of life, right? And remember, quality of life also is a big factor to play or plays a big role in indicating or reflecting whether there were actual developments in an economy. So these are some of the same indicators that helps to determine how well we are developing as. So growth without development, yes, that can happen, right? National income can increase, but poverty and unemployment rate can also increase, right? Because we find that wealth distribution, income distribution is still unequal. Some persons earn a lot. We see that in the private sector, there are some businesses that they earn a lot, and then there are some that struggle, and then you have individuals that work for high income, and then there are those who work for very low income, and then the standard of living differs, and poverty rate is a real thing. Unemployment rate is also a real thing in many countries, and increasing based on certain events and all of that can worsen it. You have issues of corruption and fraud. All these play a big role in determining how developed a country is, right? So it's not just about the income. Now, GDP growth or economic growth can be affected by different things. So, how can countries help to improve, or how can they monitor and ensure that there's an increase in GDP? So, we're looking here at one, investment in capital. Capital here, remember, looks at money, financial capital, and investment in fixed capital, in machinery, right? The equipment. So if countries can get more businesses to manufacture and improve their production of goods and services by investing in more capital, therefore we'll see more growth in the production of goods and services, and therefore we'll see economic growth, right? If that does not happen, then economic growth will decline, right? Which says that businesses are not producing and whether a country is developed or not. So how do we rank on the developed countries? Most people are poor, so poverty is a factor, as we mentioned earlier. Lack of communication, technology, and transportation. We already mentioned the factor of access to technology. And then, of course, when we talked about standard of living and quality of life, we talked about access to public utilities, which is communication and transportation, and also lighting or power, electricity. So lack of these things, we often find them in underdeveloped countries. Low literacy rate, people not being able to read. Low life expectancy, they're not living that long based on average life expectancy. So these are something factors that rank underdeveloped countries and as they compare to developed countries, right? All right, so how do governments or countries therefore deal with this issue about economic growth and development? How do they improve economic growth and development? And although we looked at the two factors separately, these are two terms that should really, or normally we see them together. So we often hear the term economic growth and development, not realizing they're different, but they are integrated at this point because every country wants to experience economic growth and also economic development. So the initiative therefore is to find ways to improve economic growth and development in any given period. So one of the key things that helps to enhance economic growth and development in a country is education. And we see how important education is in every country that we go to, or in our country, we see the emphasis placed on education because education imparts knowledge, skills, it helps to build your culture, your beliefs, it empowers people and gives them that drive or motivation, right, to do things, to be innovative, to be creative. So if you want to reduce poverty, unemployment, lack of access to certain basic things, educate people, and that gives them a good opportunity to help develop the growth and development in that country. So you have to empower your population by educating. And it basically takes us to, all right, so that ends